The woman's sobbing echoed across the wooden platform of the Oatman, Arizona train station, as dust devils swirled in the afternoon heat. And Jackson Xavier knew, before he even hitched his horse, that his life was about to change forever. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Blonde hair had come loose from what must have been an elegant style that morning, and mascara streaked down her porcelain cheeks in black rivers. The few other passengers who had disembarked from the westbound train gave her a wide berth, averting their eyes the way people did when confronted with raw suffering they did not want to acknowledge. Jackson had ridden into town only to pick up supplies and a package at the general store, but something in the way she held herself, shoulders shaking but spine still straight, made him walk toward her instead of away. "Madam." His voice was gentle, despite the natural roughness that came from years working cattle under the brutal Arizona sun. "Are you all right?" She looked up at him with eyes so green. They reminded him of the valleys back in Colorado where he had grown up, before circumstances had brought him to this harsh desert country. Those eyes were filled with such profound despair that Jackson felt his chest tighten. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Jackson crouched down beside the bench where she sat, his weathered hands resting on his knees. He was 28 years old and had seen his share of hardship, but the naked fear in this woman's face stirred something protective in him that he had not felt in years. "Whatever happened, you are not alone right now. I promise you that." "I have nowhere to go," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse as though she had been crying for hours. "He took everything. My money, my ticket back home, even my mother's ring. He said I was his property now, and when I refused him, he left me here with nothing." The rage that swept through Jackson was white-hot and immediate. He had encountered men like that before, cowards who preyed on women traveling alone, who saw vulnerability as opportunity. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to remain calm for her sake. Who was he? Where did he go? She shook her head. "He got back on the train, said he was heading to California and I could rot here in this desert for all he cared." Her hands twisted in her lap, wringing the fabric of her skirt. "I met him in Santa Fe. He seemed kind, respectful. He said he was a businessman, that he would escort me safely to my aunt's house in Los Angeles. I am such a fool." "No," Jackson said firmly. "You are not a fool. He is a criminal and a coward." "What is your name?" "Margaret Monroe," she said softly. "Everyone calls me Maggie." "Well, Miss Monroe, my name is Jackson Xavier, and I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It is not fancy, but it is safe and clean, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is there. You can stay there until we figure out what to do next." He saw the immediate fear flash across her face and held up his hands. "I know you have no reason to trust me or any other man right now, but I give you my word that I will not harm you. Come home with me. You are safe now." Maggie studied his face for a long moment, and Jackson did not look away. He knew what she was seeing. A tall man with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that needed cutting, and the kind of calloused hands that spoke of honest work. His eyes were blue, and people often told him they were his best feature because they were unusually expressive. He hoped she could see the sincerity in them now. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." "Because leaving you here would make me no better than the man who abandoned you," Jackson replied simply. "And because I was raised to believe that when someone needs help, you give it." No questions asked. She drew in a shaky breath and nodded. "All right, thank you, Mr. Xavier. Jackson, please." He stood and offered her his hand. When she took it, he felt how cold her fingers were despite the oppressive heat. "Do you have any belongings, just this?" She gestured to a small carpet bag beside the bench. He took my trunk. Said it was payment for the train ticket he bought me. Jackson picked up the bag, marveling at how light it was. This woman had been left with almost nothing, stranded in a harsh frontier town where she knew no one. The vulnerability of her position made his protective instincts surge even stronger. "My horse is just over there. Have you ridden before?" "A few times when I was younger," Maggie said, standing on shaky legs. "My father had a small farm in Ohio before he died. Then you will ride with me." "It is not far." He led her to where his bay gelding was tied, a patient animal named Copper who had been his constant companion for 3 years. Jackson secured her bag to the saddle, then mounted smoothly before reaching down for her. "Put your foot on mine and take my hand." Maggie hesitated only a moment before doing as instructed. Jackson pulled her up behind him, and she settled onto Copper's back with more grace than he expected. "Hold on to me," he said. "The trail can be rough." Her arms came around his waist tentatively at first, then tightened as Copper began to move. Jackson could feel her trembling against his back, whether from fear or exhaustion or both, he could not tell. He kept the horse at a steady walk through town, ignoring the curious stares from the few people on the street. Oatman was a small mining community that had sprung up in the last decade, rough around the edges but with enough decent folks that Jackson had chosen to settle nearby. As they left the town behind and headed into the open desert, Maggie spoke again. "How long have you lived here?" "4 years. I came from Colorado originally, worked on various ranches until I saved enough to buy my own land. It is small compared to some of the bigger operations, but it is mine." Pride colored his voice despite himself. "I run about 200 head of cattle, some horses, and Mrs. Chen keeps chickens and a vegetable garden that somehow thrives despite this climate." "Mrs. Chen," Maggie repeated. "That is an unusual name for these parts." "She came from San Francisco after her husband died. Her son worked for me briefly before he headed east for a railroad job. She needed a place to stay. I needed help managing the house. It worked out well for both of us." Jackson guided Copper around a large saguaro cactus. "She is a wonderful cook and has a sharp tongue when she thinks I am being foolish, which is fairly often according to her." He heard a small, watery laugh from behind him, and something in his chest loosened. If she could still laugh, even just a little, then perhaps she was not completely broken by whatever ordeal she had endured. The land here was beautiful in its own harsh way. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels across the rolling hills, their arms raised to the endless blue sky. Palo Verde trees provided sparse shade, their green bark bright against the red earth. In the distance, jagged mountain peaks rose purple and majestic. Jackson had grown to love this country, even with its unforgiving nature. It demanded respect and strength, but it also offered a kind of freedom he had never found anywhere else. "It is so different from home," Maggie said quietly. "So open. In Ohio, there were trees everywhere and green grass and rain. Here it feels like the earth is exposed, vulnerable." "That is a good way to describe it," Jackson agreed. "But there is water if you know where to look, and life everywhere once you learn to see it. This land provides for those who respect it." They rode in silence for a while longer until the ranch came into view. It was modest by any standard. A single-story ranch house built from adobe and wood, a barn that could house a dozen horses, several corrals, and a few outbuildings for equipment and feed. But the house had a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides, and Jackson had planted cottonwood trees when he first arrived that were now tall enough to provide real shade. A windmill turned lazily near the barn, pumping water into a large trough. Mrs. Chen emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a small woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair always pulled into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. "You are late," she called out in her accented English. "I was beginning to think you got yourself into trouble in town." "Not me this time," Jackson said, dismounting before helping Maggie down. "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Margaret Monroe. She has had a difficult day and will be staying with us for a while. Mrs. Chen took one look at Maggie's tear-stained face and torn dress, and her expression shifted from curious to fiercely protective in an instant. "Of course she will. Come, child, you look like you need tea and a bath and a good meal. Jackson, take care of your horse and then bring Miss Monroe's things to the guest room." "Yes, madam," Jackson said with a slight grin. Mrs. Chen had a way of taking charge that brooked no argument, and truthfully, he was grateful for it. Maggie would be more comfortable with another woman, especially after what she had been through. Maggie glanced back at him as Mrs. Chen ushered her toward the house. "Thank you," she said again, and the gratitude in her eyes was almost painful to see. "You are welcome," Jackson replied. He watched them disappear inside before leading Copper to the barn. As he unsaddled the horse and brushed him down, his mind kept returning to those green eyes filled with tears. He did not know what had possessed him to bring a complete stranger home, but he knew with bone-deep certainty that it had been the right thing to do. Inside the house, Mrs. Chen was already heating water for a bath and pressing a cup of chamomile tea into Maggie's shaking hands. "Drink," she ordered, "and then you tell me what happened or you do not tell me, but you are safe here. Jackson is a good man, one of the best I have known. He would die before he let harm come to someone under his protection." Maggie sipped the tea, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. She was still trembling, still reeling from the nightmare her life had become in the span of a few short hours. This morning she had been on the train with William, the man who had charmed her in Santa Fe with his polished manners and expensive clothes. He had offered to escort her to Los Angeles, and foolishly, desperately, she had accepted. Her parents were both dead, she had no siblings, and her aunt in California was her only living relative. Traveling alone as a young woman was dangerous, everyone had told her so. William had seemed like an answer to prayer. Instead, he had revealed himself to be a monster. He had tried to force himself on her in a private car, his hands rough and cruel, his words degrading. When she had fought him off and threatened to scream, he had laughed. Then at the Oatman station, he had taken everything of value she owned and left her stranded, warning her that if she caused trouble, he would tell everyone she was a whore who had tried to steal from him. And who would they believe, he had asked? A respected businessman or a desperate woman traveling alone. Now she sat in a stranger's kitchen, being tended to by a woman she had just met, her entire future uncertain. But the tea was good and Mrs. Chen's presence was comforting, and through the window she could see Jackson in the corral with his horse, his movements patient and practiced. He had not touched her beyond helping her onto the horse. He had not looked at her with anything but kindness and concern. It was not much, but it was more than she had expected to find today. "Let me show you the guest room," Mrs. Chen said after Maggie had finished her tea. "You can wash and rest. Tomorrow we will think about what comes next." The guest room was small but clean, with a real bed covered in a quilt and a window that looked out toward the mountains. There was a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a small dresser, and a chair. Maggie felt tears spring to her eyes again at the simple kindness of being given a private space. Mrs. Chen brought in a large basin of warm water and some soft cloths. "I will find you something clean to wear. You are taller than me, but I have a dress that might work until we can get you something proper." She paused at the door. "You have been through something terrible today, I can see that." But you are still here, still standing. That takes strength. Do not forget that." After she left, Maggie peeled off her ruined dress and washed herself slowly, carefully, trying to scrub away the feeling of William's hands on her. The water turned gray and she felt marginally more human. Mrs. Chen returned with a simple cotton dress in pale blue that was indeed too short, hitting above Maggie's ankles, but it was clean and whole. She also brought a comb, and Maggie worked through the tangles in her hair until it fell smooth down her back. When she emerged from the room, the sun was lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. She found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen preparing dinner, and the older woman gestured for her to sit at the large wooden table. "You can help me shell these peas if you like, or you can just sit. Either is fine." Maggie took a bowl of peas and began working, grateful for something to do with her hands. "Where is Jackson?" finishing up work. "He will come in when he is done. He works very hard, sometimes too hard. I tell him he needs to hire more men, but he is stubborn." There was clear affection in Mrs. Chen's voice. "He saved my life, you know. After my husband died and my son left, I had nothing. I was going to throw myself into the ocean. Then Jackson found me, brought me here, gave me purpose again. So when he brings home a young woman who needs help, I do not question it. I understand what it is like to be saved." Maggie felt her throat tighten. "I do not know how I will ever repay him, repay you both." "You do not need to repay kindness," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "That is not how it works. You accept it, you heal, and someday when you see someone else who needs help, you give it. That is how kindness spreads." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic motion of shelling peas soothing Maggie's frayed nerves. When Jackson finally came in, his shirt dusty and his face tired, he brightened slightly at seeing her at the table. "You look better," he said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean more rested. Not that you looked bad before, just that you looked upset, which makes sense, and I should stop talking now." Despite everything, Maggie found herself almost smiling at his awkwardness. "I understood what you meant. Thank you." Dinner was a simple but delicious meal of roasted chicken, vegetables from the garden, and fresh bread. Jackson ate with the hearty appetite of a man who had done physical labor all day, and the conversation was light, mostly Mrs. Chen telling stories about her chickens and their various personalities. Maggie was content to listen, to let the normalcy of the domestic scene wash over her. After dinner, Jackson excused himself to wash up, and Mrs. Chen began clearing the table. Maggie helped without being asked, and the older woman nodded approvingly. When the kitchen was clean, Mrs. Chen declared she was tired and was going to bed. "My room is just there," she pointed to a door off the kitchen. "If you need anything in the night, you call for me." Maggie thanked her and found herself alone in the main room. It was furnished simply. A sofa, 2 chairs, a bookshelf filled with an eclectic mix of volumes, and a fireplace that probably was not used much given the climate. She wandered to the bookshelf, running her fingers over the spines. Shakespeare, Dickens, dime novels about cowboys and outlaws, books on animal husbandry and ranching. It was an interesting collection. "You like to read?" Jackson's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway, his hair damp from washing. "I love it," Maggie admitted. "My mother taught me when I was young. We did not have many books, but I read the ones we had over and over. Feel free to borrow any you like." He moved into the room, maintaining a respectful distance. "I know this situation is strange, and you have no reason to trust me, but I want you to know that you can stay here as long as you need. I will not ask for anything in return, and I will not let anyone hurt you." The sincerity in his voice made Maggie's eyes burn with unshed tears. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I could be lying about everything." Jackson considered this. But you are not, are you? I have gotten good at reading people over the years. It is a necessary skill out here, and I can see that you are telling the truth. He sat down in one of the chairs, and after a moment, Maggie sat on the sofa. Besides, even if you were lying, you clearly need help. That is what matters. I was not always so trusting, Maggie said quietly. Before today, I thought I was a good judge of character. William seemed so kind, so respectful. He had good clothes, good manners. He talked about his business dealings and his family back east. I believed every word. Men like that are skilled liars, Jackson said, his voice hardening. They know how to present themselves. The fact that he fooled you does not mean you are a bad judge of character. It means he is a practiced predator. Maggie looked at him directly. How do I know you are not the same? You do not, Jackson admitted. Not yet, but time will show you. I am not going anywhere, and neither are you until you are ready. Let my actions speak for me. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting to safer topics. Jackson told her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in the desert, about the wild horses that sometimes ran through his land. Maggie told him about Ohio, about her parents and their small farm, about her mother's death from fever 2 years ago, and her father's death in a farming accident last autumn. She had been staying with a friend's family in Santa Fe, trying to decide what to do with her life, when she received the letter from her aunt inviting her to California. I have never even met her, Maggie admitted. She and my mother were estranged, some disagreement before I was born. But she reached out when she heard about my parents, said she wanted to help me. It seemed like a sign, a new beginning. You can still write to her, Jackson suggested. Explain what happened. Perhaps she can send money for a train ticket. Maggie nodded, though the thought of reaching out to a stranger for money made her stomach churn. But what choice did she have? She had nothing. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with her. Jackson noticed her fighting to keep her eyes open and stood. You should get some rest. Tomorrow we can go into town if you feel up to it. Send a telegram to your aunt. Thank you, Maggie said, standing as well, for everything. You do not have to keep thanking me, Jackson said gently. Just focus on healing. That is enough. That night, lying in the comfortable bed in the guest room, Maggie stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened. She had been terrified, violated, abandoned, and then rescued all in the span of a few hours. Jackson Xavier was an enigma, a rough cowboy with kind eyes and a bookshelf full of literature. Mrs. Chen was a fierce protector disguised as a housekeeper, and this ranch, harsh and beautiful in equal measure, felt strangely like a sanctuary. For the first time since William had revealed his true nature, Maggie felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. She was safe. Whatever came next, she was safe for now. That was more than she had dared hope for this morning. Over the following days, Maggie began to settle into the rhythm of ranch life. They had sent a telegram to her aunt in Los Angeles, explaining the situation in vague terms and requesting help. Now, there was nothing to do but wait for a response. In the meantime, Maggie found herself drawn into the daily work of the household. She helped Mrs. Chen with cooking and cleaning, tended the vegetable garden, and collected eggs from the chickens. The physical labor was exhausting but also therapeutic, giving her mind something to focus on besides her fears and regrets. Jackson kept his distance, always polite and respectful but never invasive. She would see him working from dawn until dusk, mending fences, moving cattle, training horses. Sometimes in the evenings he would sit on the porch and play a battered guitar, singing old folk songs in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. Maggie found herself listening from inside the house, drawn to the melancholy beauty of the melodies. A week after her arrival, Jackson approached her one morning as she was hanging laundry. "Would you like to learn to ride properly?" he asked. "We have a gentle mare that would be perfect for a beginner, and knowing how to ride could be useful to you." Maggie considered this. "I would like that," she decided. "Thank you." That afternoon, Jackson introduced her to Daisy, a sweet-tempered chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead. He showed Maggie how to saddle her, explaining each step patiently. "The most important thing is that she trusts you," he said. "Horses are prey animals, so they are naturally cautious. You need to be calm and confident, even if you do not feel it inside." Maggie climbed onto Daisy with Jackson's help, and they spent an hour walking around the corral. Jackson explained how to hold the reins, how to use her legs to guide the horse, how to sit in the saddle. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish when she made mistakes. "You are a natural," he said when they finished. "Daisy likes you. She can be stubborn with people she does not trust." "I like her too," Maggie said, stroking the mare's neck. "Thank you for this. We can ride together sometime if you want," Jackson offered. "There is a canyon about an hour from here where wild horses sometimes gather. It is beautiful." "I would like that very much." The riding lessons became a regular part of their routine. Every afternoon, Jackson would spend an hour with Maggie and Daisy, gradually extending the difficulty of what they did. Within 2 weeks, Maggie was comfortable enough to ride outside the corral, and Jackson made good on his promise to show her the canyon. They rode out early one morning when the air was still cool. Jackson led the way on Copper, and Maggie followed on Daisy, growing more confident with each passing mile. The landscape was stunning in the early light, the red rocks glowing like embers and the cacti casting long shadows. Jackson pointed out various plants and animals, sharing his knowledge freely. He showed her which cacti held water, which snakes to avoid, how to read the tracks left by different animals in the dust. "You love this place," Maggie observed. "I do," Jackson admitted. "It is hard country, but it is honest. There is no pretense here, no falseness. Everything is exactly what it appears to be." When they reached the canyon, Maggie gasped. It was a deep slash in the earth, walls of red and orange stone rising hundreds of feet. At the bottom, a thin stream glittered silver in the sunlight, and green vegetation clustered along its banks. And there, drinking from the stream, was a small band of wild horses, bays and blacks and paints, their coats gleaming in the sun. "They are magnificent," Maggie whispered. "They are survivors," Jackson said. "This land tries to kill everything, but they have adapted, learned to thrive. There is a lesson in that." They sat on their horses in silence, watching the wild band. Maggie felt something shift inside her, a recognition that she too was a survivor. She had been knocked down, hurt, left for dead metaphorically if not literally. But she was still here, still standing. Like these horses, she could adapt and learn to thrive again. On the ride back, Jackson told her more about himself. He had left Colorado after his parents died in a fire, unable to stay in a place haunted by so many memories. He had drifted for years, working various jobs until he ended up in Arizona. "Something about this place called to me," he said. "It felt like a place where I could start over, build something that was mine. So I saved every penny for 3 years, and when this land came up for sale, I bought it. Best decision I ever made." "You ever get lonely?" Maggie asked. "It is very isolated out here." "Sometimes," Jackson admitted. "But I have Mrs. Chen, and I have the work, and I have the land. That has been enough." He glanced at her. "Although I will admit, it has been nice having someone to talk to who is not a horse or a cow or a bossy housekeeper." Maggie laughed, a real laugh that felt wonderful after so many days of heaviness. "I imagine your conversations with the cows are fairly one-sided." You would be surprised, Jackson said with a grin. Some of them are quite opinionated. When they arrived back at the ranch, Mrs. Chen met them with news. A telegram came for you, Miss Monroe, from your aunt. Maggie's hands shook as she opened it. Her aunt was sympathetic but regretful. She was ill herself, too ill to take on the care of anyone else. She had enclosed $20, all she could spare, but she could not offer Maggie a home. The words blurred on the page as Maggie read them twice, 3 times, hoping they would change. "What does it say?" Jackson asked gently. "She cannot help me," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "She is ill and she cannot help me." Without thinking, Jackson pulled her into his arms and Maggie let herself be held. She cried against his chest, all the fear and uncertainty pouring out of her. Jackson did not say anything, just held her steady and let her break apart in safety. Mrs. Chen stood nearby, her face sad but unsurprised. In this harsh country, disappointment was common as dust. When Maggie finally pulled away, wiping her eyes, she felt embarrassed. "I am sorry." "Do not be," Jackson said firmly. "You have every right to cry. This is not fair and you are allowed to feel it." "What am I going to do?" Maggie asked helplessly. "I have no family, no money except these $20, no prospects. I cannot impose on your kindness forever." "You are not imposing," Jackson said, "and you can stay here as long as you need. We will figure something out. There are jobs in town," Mrs. Chen suggested. "The saloon is always looking for girls." "No," Jackson said sharply. "That is not the kind of work Miss Monroe should have to do." "I am not too proud to work," Maggie said quietly. "And I cannot rely on charity forever. Perhaps the saloon is my only option." "There are other options," Jackson insisted. "Give me time to think." Over the next few days, the question of Maggie's future hung over the household like a storm cloud. She continued to help with the work, learning more each day about the running of a ranch. Mrs. Chen taught her to churn butter, to preserve vegetables, to mend clothes. Jackson taught her more about horses and cattle, and Maggie found herself genuinely interested in the work. She had grown up on a small farm, so much of it was familiar, but ranching was different, more challenging in the harsh climate. One evening, as she was helping Jackson feed the horses, he spoke suddenly. "What if you stayed?" Maggie looked up from the bucket of oats she was holding. "What?" "What if you stayed here permanently?" Jackson's voice was cautious, as though he was afraid she would bolt. "Not as a guest, but as part of the ranch. Mrs. Chen is getting older and she could use the help. And truthfully, I could use another hand. The ranch is growing and there is more work than I can manage alone." "You want to hire me?" Maggie asked, surprised. "I want to offer you a place," Jackson corrected. "A home, a purpose, fair wages, and the knowledge that you are safe. You are smart and capable, and you have learned faster in the past few weeks than most people would in months. You belong here if you want to be here." Maggie's heart was pounding. The offer was generous almost beyond belief, but it also terrified her. Staying meant trusting Jackson, truly trusting him, in a way she had sworn she would never trust a man again. But it also meant security, purpose, and the chance to build a life in this strange, beautiful place. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Say you will think about it," Jackson suggested. "There is no pressure, no rush, but the offer is genuine." That night, Maggie lay awake thinking. The reasonable part of her brain said to be cautious, to protect herself, to find work in town and maintain her independence. But another part, a deeper part, whispered that she had already found something rare here. Jackson had never treated her as anything less than an equal. He had never made her feel unsafe or pressured. He had simply offered kindness, day after day, with no expectation of anything in return. And if she was honest with herself, she had come to care for this place. The harsh beauty of the desert had worked its way into her heart. The daily rhythms of ranch life had given her a sense of purpose she had not felt since her parents died. And Jackson himself, with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness, had become someone she looked forward to seeing each morning. It was not love, she told herself firmly. It was gratitude and respect, and the natural affection that grew between people who lived and worked together. But even as she thought it, she knew she was lying to herself. What she felt when Jackson smiled at her when his hand accidentally brushed hers, when she heard him singing on the porch in the evenings, that was not just gratitude. That was something much more dangerous. The next morning she found Jackson in the barn grooming Copper. "I have thought about your offer," she said without preamble, "and I accept. I want to stay." The smile that broke across Jackson's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of joy. "I am glad," he said simply. "Really glad." "There should be rules," Maggie said quickly. "Boundaries. I do not want there to be any confusion about this arrangement." Jackson's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable." They worked out the details over breakfast with Mrs. Chen. Maggie would take over some of Mrs. Chen's heavier duties, help with the horses and cattle as needed, and be paid a fair wage. She would continue staying in the guest room. Everyone would respect everyone else's privacy and space. It was a business arrangement, they all agreed, nothing more. Except as the weeks turned into months, it became clear that it was much more than that. Maggie thrived on the ranch. She learned to rope and brand cattle, to deliver foals, to recognize the signs of illness in livestock. She spent hours riding Daisy across the open desert, growing more confident and skilled with each passing day. Her skin tanned, her muscles grew strong, and the haunted look in her eyes gradually faded. Mrs. Chen declared her a natural rancher, and Jackson praised her work ethic constantly. And through it all, Maggie and Jackson grew closer. It was inevitable, really. They worked side by side every day, facing challenges and celebrating victories together. Jackson told her about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to expand, his hope to one day breed the finest horses in the territory. Maggie shared her own hopes, rediscovering ambitions she had thought lost after her parents died. She talked about maybe starting a small horse breeding program focused on gentle, trainable animals perfect for families. Jackson encouraged her enthusiastically. They began to read together in the evenings, taking turns choosing books and discussing them afterward. Jackson was surprisingly well-read for a cowboy, with strong opinions on everything from Hamlet to Moby Dick. Maggie loved their debates, the way he listened to her ideas with genuine interest, never dismissing her thoughts as silly or wrong. Mrs. Chen watched their growing closeness with knowing eyes but said nothing. She had seen this coming from the day Jackson brought Maggie home. The way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, the way she smiled when he entered a room, the careful way they avoided touching each other as though afraid of what would happen if they did. Mrs. Chen was old and wise enough to know that love like that could not be denied forever, no matter what rules they set. The moment everything changed came 4 months after Maggie arrived. They were moving a small herd to a different pasture when a rattlesnake spooked one of the steers. The animal bolted, and before Maggie could react, it slammed into Daisy's flank. The mare reared in surprise, and Maggie, caught off guard, was thrown from the saddle. She landed hard, the breath knocked out of her. Pain exploded through her shoulder and ribs. She heard Jackson shout her name, heard the thunder of Copper's hooves as he raced toward her. Then he was there, kneeling beside her, his hands hovering over her as though afraid to touch her. "Are you hurt? Where does it hurt? Tell me what hurts." His voice was frantic, all his usual calm shattered. "My shoulder," Maggie gasped, struggling to breathe. And my ribs. Very gently, Jackson helped her sit up. His hands were shaking as he checked her over, and Maggie realized with sudden clarity that he was terrified. Not just worried or concerned, but genuinely afraid for her. "We need to get you back to the house," he said. "Can you stand?" With his help, Maggie got to her feet. Her shoulder throbbed and her ribs ached with each breath, but nothing seemed broken. Jackson whistled for Daisy and Copper, and both horses trotted over obediently. "You are riding with me," Jackson said. "I am not risking you falling again." He lifted her onto Copper with a gentleness that made Maggie's heart ache, then mounted behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, effectively cradling her against his chest. Maggie let herself lean into him, suddenly too tired and sore to maintain the careful distance they usually kept back at the ranch. Mrs. Chen clucked over her like a worried hen, checking for breaks and bruises. "You will be sore for days," she pronounced, "but nothing is broken. You were lucky." Jackson paced the room like a caged animal until Mrs. Chen finally snapped at him. "You are making everyone nervous. Go outside and do something useful." He left reluctantly, and Mrs. Chen helped Maggie change into a nightgown and get into bed. "That man cares for you," the older woman said bluntly as she tucked blankets around Maggie. "More than he should if this is just a business arrangement." "I know," Maggie whispered. "I care for him too." "Then what is stopping you?" Mrs. Chen asked. "You are both adults, both free, both clearly miserable, trying to pretend you do not have feelings." "I am afraid," Maggie admitted. "I trusted William and he betrayed me terribly. What if I am wrong about Jackson? What if he is not who I think he is?" Mrs. Chen sat on the edge of the bed. "That man has had you living in his house for 4 months. He has never once been inappropriate, never once pressured you, never once made you feel unsafe. If he was going to reveal himself as a monster, do you not think he would have done it by now?" "I suppose," Maggie said uncertainly. "You cannot let one bad man ruin your chance at happiness with a good one," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "That would be letting William win. Is that what you want?" After Mrs. Chen left, Maggie lay in bed thinking. Her shoulder throbbed and her ribs ached, but her mind was clear. Mrs. Chen was right. She had spent 4 months watching Jackson, testing him without even realizing it, and he had passed every test. He was kind but not weak, strong but not cruel, protective but not controlling. He had given her space to heal and grow, had never asked for anything in return for his kindness, had treated her as an equal partner in the running of the ranch. She thought about the way he had looked at her after the fall, the raw fear in his eyes. That was not the look of a man who saw her as an employee or even just a friend. That was the look of a man who cared deeply, who could not bear the thought of her being hurt, and she cared for him just as much, she realized. Somewhere between those first awful days and now, gratitude had transformed into affection, and affection had deepened into love. She loved his quiet strength, his unexpected humor, his passion for the land and the animals in his care. She loved the way he sang off-key when he thought no one was listening, the way he debated literature with such enthusiasm, the way he always made sure she felt safe and valued. She was in love with Jackson Xavier, and it was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. That evening, Jackson knocked softly on her door. "Can I come in?" he called. "Yes," Maggie replied, pushing herself up carefully to a sitting position. He entered carrying a tray with soup and bread. "Mrs. Chen said you should eat something. How are you feeling?" "Sore, but all right." Maggie took the tray, grateful for the food. "Thank you." Jackson sat in the chair near the bed, close enough to talk but far enough to be proper. "You scared me today," he said quietly. "When I saw you fall, I thought my heart would stop." "I am fine," Maggie assured him. "Just bruised." "It made me realize something," Jackson continued, his blue eyes intense. These past months, having you here, working with you, talking with you, it has been the happiest I have been in years. And today, when I thought you might be seriously hurt, I realized that I cannot keep pretending this is just a business arrangement. Not for me anyway. Maggie's heart began to race. What are you saying? I am saying that I care for you, Maggie. More than I should, more than I have a right to. I know we set boundaries and I have tried to respect them, but I need you to know the truth. You are not just an employee to me. You are not just a friend. You are someone who has become essential to me, someone I cannot imagine my life without. He took a deep breath. I am in love with you. And if you do not feel the same, I will respect that, and we can go back to how things were. But I could not let another day go by without telling you. Tears sprang to Maggie's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. You are not alone in feeling that way, she said, her voice shaking. I love you too, Jackson. I think I have loved you for a while now, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself. The smile that broke across Jackson's face was brilliant. He stood and crossed to the bed, sitting carefully on the edge. May I kiss you? He asked softly. Please, Maggie whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Maggie did not pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of all the words they had not said over the past months. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. I want to do this right, Jackson said, taking her hand. I want to court you properly, make sure you know you are cherished and respected. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I want to marry you, but there is no rush. We have all the time in the world. I want that too, Maggie said, squeezing his hand. All of it. Over the following weeks, Maggie healed from her fall, and her relationship with Jackson blossomed into something beautiful. They were still partners in running the ranch, but now there was an openness between them that had not existed before. They held hands while walking in the evenings, stole kisses in the barn when they thought misses. Chen was not looking, and talked late into the night about their hopes and dreams for the future. Mrs. Chen watched their happiness with satisfaction, claiming credit for pushing them together and conveniently forgetting that they had figured it out themselves. She began making none too subtle comments about weddings and grandchildren, which made Jackson blush and Maggie laugh. 2 months after their first kiss, Jackson took Maggie back to the canyon where the wild horses ran. They rode out in the early morning, arriving just as the sun crested the horizon. The canyon walls glowed gold and red, and the wild horses were there, drinking from the stream. Jackson dismounted and helped Maggie down, then took both her hands in his. The first time I brought you here, you said these horses were survivors. You saw yourself in them, I could tell. And you were right. You are a survivor, Maggie. You were hurt and abandoned, but you did not let it destroy you. You adapted and thrived just like them. Because you gave me a place to heal, Maggie said softly. Because you showed me what kindness looks like, what real strength looks like. We healed each other, Jackson corrected. I did not realize how lonely I was until you came into my life, how much I needed someone to share this with. He dropped to one knee and Maggie gasped. Maggie Monroe, you are the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I have ever known. You make me laugh, you challenge me, you make me want to be better. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small emerald that matched her eyes. It was my grandmother's, he explained. The only thing I have left from my family. I want you to have it. Maggie was crying, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Jackson slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply while the wild horses watched, and the canyon walls echoed with the sound of their joy. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony in Oatman. Mrs. Chen served as witness, and the town's circuit preacher performed the service. Maggie wore a dress of ivory lace that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Jackson wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous in equal measure. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed Maggie with such tenderness that several of the watching townspeople wiped their eyes. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, just the three of them and a few neighboring ranchers who had become friends. They ate Mrs. Chen's cooking, drank wine, and celebrated late into the night, and when everyone finally left and Mrs. Chen retired to her room with a knowing wink, Jackson carried Maggie over the threshold of what was now their bedroom. "Are you nervous?" he asked, setting her down gently. "A little," Maggie admitted, "but not afraid, not with you." Jackson cupped her face in his hands. "We go at your pace. Always. If you need to stop at any point, we stop. Your comfort and happiness matter more to me than anything else." The gentleness in his voice, the respect in his eyes, made Maggie fall in love with him all over again. This was the man who had rescued her when she had nothing, who had given her safety and purpose, who had loved her without asking for anything in return. This was her husband, her partner, her love. "I am ready," she said. "I want this. I want you." Their wedding night was everything it should have been. Tender and passionate, awkward and perfect, full of whispered words and gentle touches. Jackson was patient and careful, making sure Maggie felt safe and cherished. And when it was over, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, both of them smiling. "I love you," Maggie whispered. "Thank you for finding me that day. Thank you for seeing me when I was broken and believing I could be whole again." "You were never broken," Jackson said, kissing her forehead. "Just hurt. And you did not need me to become whole. You did that yourself. I just gave you a safe place to heal." Life on the ranch settled into a happy rhythm. Maggie and Jackson worked together every day, building their operation into one of the most successful in the region. Maggie's horse breeding program proved incredibly popular, with buyers coming from as far as California to purchase her gentle, well-trained animals. Jackson expanded the cattle operation, and within 2 years, they had nearly 500 head. Mrs. Chen continued to run the household with her usual efficiency, though she joked that she was ready to retire and let Maggie take over completely. "I am getting old," she said one evening. "I want to spend my remaining years resting in the sun, not cooking for hungry ranchers." "You will never truly retire," Maggie teased. "You enjoy bossing us around too much." "This is true," Mrs. Chen admitted with a laugh. A year and a half after their wedding, Maggie discovered she was pregnant. She told Jackson one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply. Jackson's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, disbelief, and then pure, radiant joy. "A baby," he repeated. "We are having a baby, in about 7 months, yes," Maggie confirmed, laughing at his expression. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of glass. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Maggie asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Jackson said. "I am ecstatic, terrified, overwhelmed, and so in love with you I can barely breathe." The pregnancy was not easy. The desert heat was brutal, and Maggie struggled with nausea and exhaustion. But Jackson was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly checking on her, insisting she rest, refusing to let her do any heavy work. Mrs. Chen supported his protectiveness, ganging up on Maggie whenever she tried to insist she was fine. "You are growing a human," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "That is hard work. Let us take care of the ranch for a while." Despite the discomfort, Maggie loved being pregnant. She loved watching her belly grow, feeling the baby move, imagining who this little person would become. She and Jackson spent hours discussing names, painting a small room to serve as a nursery, and making plans for the future. When her labor began one hot afternoon in September, it was fast and intense. Mrs. Chen sent Jackson for the midwife in town, and by the time they returned, Maggie was in the thick of it. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning, and Jackson paced outside the room, refusing to leave despite Mrs. Chen's assurances that everything was progressing normally. Finally, just as the sun rose over the mountains, a baby's cry pierced the air. Mrs. Chen emerged from the room, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy, very loud son." Jackson rushed into the room to find Maggie propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but glowing with happiness. In her arms was a bundle wrapped in soft blankets, and when Jackson looked down he saw a tiny red face, eyes scrunched closed, mouth open in indignant protest at having been born. "Our son," Maggie said softly. "Jackson, we have a son." Jackson sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. Tiny fingers immediately wrapped around his thumb, and Jackson felt his eyes fill with tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe he is ours." They named him James, after Jackson's father, and he was indeed loud and healthy. He had Maggie's green eyes and Jackson's dark hair, and from the beginning, he was curious about everything. As he grew from infant to toddler, James proved to have his mother's gentle nature and his father's stubborn determination. He followed Jackson everywhere around the ranch, toddling after him on chubby legs, insisting on helping with every task. 2 years after James was born, Maggie gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, though everyone called her Rose. She was quieter than her brother, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's blonde hair. Where James was all energy and enthusiasm, Rose was thoughtful and observant. She would sit for hours watching the world, taking everything in with those serious blue eyes. Mrs. Chen adored both children, spoiling them terribly and insisting she was making up for never having had grandchildren of her own. "My son is too busy with his railroads to give me grandbabies," she said. "So I claim these two as mine." The years passed in a blur of hard work and deep happiness. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most respected operations in Arizona. Maggie's horse breeding program was now famous throughout the territory, and Jackson's cattle brought top prices at market. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, with enough bedrooms for guests and a big kitchen where Mrs. Chen could work her magic. James grew into a capable young man who loved ranching as much as his parents did. At 16, he was already talking about expanding the operation, about buying more land, about breeding programs and water conservation. Rose, at 14, was quieter but equally passionate. She loved the horses best, spending hours training and riding them, developing an almost mystical ability to understand what they were thinking. One evening, as Jackson and Maggie sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Jackson pulled her close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "How everything happened. If you could go back and change things, would you?" Maggie thought about this seriously. She thought about that awful day at the train station, about William's betrayal, about how lost and afraid she had been. And then she thought about everything that had come after. Jackson's kindness, the healing she had found on this ranch, the love they had built together, the family they had created. "No," she said firmly. "I would not change anything. Yes, what happened with William was terrible, and yes, I was hurt. but it brought me here to you, to this life. Every hard thing I went through was worth it to end up here." "I feel the same way," Jackson said, kissing her temple. "That day at the train station, when I saw you crying, something in me knew that you were going to change my life. I just did not realize how much, or how grateful I would be for it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play with the ranch dogs in the yard. Mrs. Chen called from the kitchen that dinner would be ready soon. Copper and Daisy grazed peacefully in the nearby corral, both of them old now but still beloved. In the distance, the mountains turned purple and gold in the fading light. "We built something good here," Maggie said softly. "Something real and lasting." "We did," Jackson agreed. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us, years to watch our children grow, to expand the ranch, to grow old together." "I cannot wait," Maggie said, and she meant it. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility, and she wanted to experience every moment of it with this man, who had rescued her when she had nothing and loved her through everything. That night, after dinner and after the children were in bed, Jackson and Maggie walked out to the canyon where the wild horses ran. It had become a tradition over the years, visiting this place during important moments in their lives. They stood at the edge, looking down at the moonlit landscape, and saw the familiar shapes of horses moving in the darkness below. "They are still here," Maggie said. "Still surviving, still thriving. Like us," Jackson said, pulling her into his arms. "We are survivors too. We found each other when we both needed someone most, and we built something beautiful together." "I love you," Maggie said, the words still as powerful now as they had been the first time she said them. "Thank you for finding me that day. Thank you for giving me a home and a family and a life I never dreamed was possible." "Thank you for trusting me," Jackson replied. "For giving me a chance when you had every reason not to. For healing and growing and becoming my partner in every way that matters. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Maggie Xavier." They stood there together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that would last a lifetime. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and earth. Somewhere in the canyon, the wild horses called to each other, their voices echoing off the ancient stone walls, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The years continued to unfold with a gentle rhythm that Maggie had come to treasure. When James turned 21, he announced his intention to marry Sarah Watkins, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. It was a love match, clear to anyone who saw them together, and Jackson and Maggie gave their blessing enthusiastically. The wedding was held at the ranch, a bigger affair than Jackson and Maggie's own simple ceremony had been, with half the county in attendance. As Maggie watched her son take his vows, she felt Jackson's hand slip into hers. "Remember when that was us," he whispered. "Every day," Maggie whispered back. "I remember every day." Rose, at 19, was in no hurry to marry. She had her mother's independent spirit and was determined to make a name for herself as a horse trainer. She had clients coming from as far as New Mexico and Nevada, seeking her expertise. Jackson often joked that Rose would probably marry a horse before she married a man, which made Rose laugh and Maggie shake her head. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, a loss that devastated the entire household. She had been with them for so many years, had been such an integral part of their family, that her absence left a hole nothing could fill. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree she had loved to sit under on hot afternoons. "She saved my life," Maggie said at the simple funeral service. "When I had nothing and nowhere to go, she welcomed me. She taught me, encouraged me, loved me. I would not be who I am today without her." She saved mine too, Jackson added, his voice rough with emotion. She gave me purpose when I needed it most. We will miss her every day. But life on a ranch did not stop for grief. There was always work to be done, animals to care for, fences to mend. In their grief, Jackson and Maggie found comfort in the familiar routines, in the land that had given them so much, in each other. James and Sarah welcomed their first child, a daughter named Lily, making Jackson and Maggie grandparents. Holding her tiny granddaughter for the first time, Maggie was overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. From that awful day at the train station to this perfect afternoon, surrounded by family and love, the transformation was almost unbelievable. Rose eventually did fall in love with a young veterinarian named Thomas Reed who came to the ranch to treat a sick mare. They bonded over their shared love of horses, and within a year, they were married. Thomas joined the ranch operation, working alongside Rose with her breeding program, and their partnership proved as successful professionally as it was personally. As Jackson and Maggie grew older, they gradually stepped back from the daily operation of the ranch, letting James and Rose take over more responsibility. But they never stopped working entirely. Jackson still rode out to check on the cattle, and Maggie still worked with the young horses, gentling them with the patience and skill she had developed over decades. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration. The ranch was full of people, laughter, and music. There was dancing and storytelling, good food and better company. But the moment Maggie treasured most came late in the evening when she and Jackson slipped away to their favorite spot overlooking the canyon. 30 years, Jackson said wonderingly. Has it really been that long? 30 of the best years of my life, Maggie confirmed. Though I still remember that first day like it was yesterday, I remember how scared I was, how broken I felt. And I remember you offering me safety when I had no reason to trust anyone. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, Jackson said. You had been through something terrible, but you still had strength left to accept help, to trust again. That took more courage than anything I have ever done. They stood together in the twilight, just as they had so many times before. The canyon stretched before them, eternal and beautiful. And there, moving like shadows in the fading light, were the wild horses. Fewer than there had been 30 years ago, but still there, still surviving. You think they remember us? Maggie asked with a smile. All the times we have come here over the years. I like to think so, Jackson said. I like to think they recognize us as fellow survivors, people who refuse to let the harshness of this land defeat them. We did more than survive, Maggie said, leaning into him. We thrived. We built a life, a family, a legacy. Our children and grandchildren will work this land long after we are gone. That is a good legacy, Jackson agreed. But the best thing we built was this. He gestured between them. This love, this partnership, that is what I am most proud of. Me too, Maggie whispered. They returned to the party eventually, to their family and friends, to the celebration of 3 decades of marriage. But both of them carried the peace of that moment in the canyon, the reminder of how far they had come and how blessed they had been. As the years continued to pass, Jackson and Maggie grew old together with grace and gratitude. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated the births of great-grandchildren, and saw the ranch continue to prosper under James and Rose's capable management. They took walks together every evening, still holding hands like young lovers. They sat on the porch in the cool of the morning, drinking coffee and planning the day. They read together in the evenings, though both of them needed reading glasses now. When Jackson was 75, he had a health scare that reminded them both that their time was not infinite. He recovered, but it prompted conversations about the future, about what would happen when one of them was gone. They updated their wills, made sure everything was in order for their children, and most importantly, they made promises to each other. "If something happens to me first, I want you to keep living," Jackson said seriously. "Really living, not just existing. Keep working with the horses, keep spending time with the grandchildren, keep finding joy in this life we built." "I will if you will," Maggie replied. "The same goes for you. If I am the one who goes first, do not shut down. Keep living. Promise me." They promised, though both hoped it would be many years before either promise needed to be kept, on a cool autumn evening when Jackson was 78 and Maggie was 76. They took one final ride out to the canyon. It was harder to mount the horses now, and the ride took longer than it used to, but they were determined. This place had been so important to them for so long, they needed to see it one more time together. The wild horses were there, a small band now, fewer than a dozen. But they were there, still surviving against the odds, still thriving in the harsh desert. Jackson and Maggie sat on their horses, side by side, watching the sun set over the canyon walls. "It has been a good life," Jackson said softly. "Better than I ever dared dream." "The best life," Maggie agreed. "And it all started because you saw a woman crying at a train station and decided to help. That one act of kindness changed everything." "It was not just kindness," Jackson said, looking at her with eyes that still held all the love they had always held. "It was fate. It was destiny. It was the universe putting us in the same place at the same time because we were meant to find each other." "Do you really believe that?" Maggie asked. "I do," Jackson said firmly. "I believe we were meant to be together, to build this life, to love each other. And I believe that wherever we go next, after this life is done, we will find each other again." Tears streamed down Maggie's face, but she was smiling. "I believe that too. I have to believe that. I cannot imagine any existence where we are not together." They rode back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, and that night they lay in bed holding each other close, grateful for every moment they had been given. Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 80. Maggie woke to find him still holding her hand, a slight smile on his face as though he had left this world content. The grief was crushing, a physical weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. But she remembered her promise, and she kept it. She continued to work with the horses, continued to spend time with her family, continued to find joy in the sunrises and the wind in the cottonwood trees and the laughter of her great-grandchildren. At night, alone in the bed that felt too big without him, she would talk to Jackson. She told him about her day, about the things the children had done, about the young filly she was training. She told him she loved him, that she missed him, that she was trying to keep her promise to keep living. And sometimes, in the quiet darkness, she felt a response, a sense of presence that comforted her. Maggie lived 4 more years without Jackson, years filled with family and purpose, and the land she had grown to love. When she finally passed away at the age of 80, peacefully in her sleep just as Jackson had, her children buried her beside him on the hillside next to Mrs. Chen, beneath the cottonwood trees. On her headstone, below her name and dates, James had engraved, "She found safety and built a legacy. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend." And on Jackson's headstone, "He offered kindness and found love. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, and friend." Between them, a single inscription, "Together in life, together forever." The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family. James's children and Rose's children worked the land, bred the horses, and told stories of their grandparents, the couple who had built something extraordinary from nothing. The tale of how they met, How Jackson had found Maggie crying at the train station and brought her home became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. And sometimes, on cool autumn evenings when the light was just right, people claimed they could see two figures on horseback at the edge of the canyon, watching the wild horses below. Just shadows, probably, or tricks of the fading light. But those who knew the story, who understood the depth of the love Jackson and Maggie had shared, liked to believe it was them, still together, still finding joy in the land they had loved and the life they had built. Because some loves are too strong to be contained by a single lifetime. Some bonds run too deep to be severed by death. And the love between Jackson Xavier and Maggie Monroe Xavier was that kind of love, the kind that echoes through generations, the kind that changes not just two lives but countless lives that follow. It all started with an act of kindness on a dusty train platform, with a man who saw suffering and chose to help, with a woman who was brave enough to trust again. From that single moment, a love story unfolded that would inspire and endure long after both of them were gone. And in the wild, harsh beauty of the Arizona desert, where saguaro cacti stand like sentinels and wild horses still run free, that love story continues to whisper on the wind, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, salvation can appear in unexpected forms. Sometimes it wears the face of a cowboy with kind eyes who says 5 simple words. Come home with me. You are safe now. Those words changed everything. Those words built a legacy. And that legacy of love and kindness continues still, living on in the land, the animals, and the family that Jackson and Maggie created together. Proof that one moment of compassion can ripple forward through time, touching lives not yet born, creating beauty that outlasts even death itself.